morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. It's great to be able to connect to all of you. And like how the previous speaker said, these are interesting times for internet startups, the technology startups, and I happen to be one of those. So yeah, definitely I think both internal and external communication is something we are trying to be even more thoughtful about today. But before I get into the current, let me share how did we start thinking about communication and how did we approach it. So we started Cast24 in 2015, and prior to Cast24, I had done another startup called Furnish, which was in selling furniture online. Now, one of the things my learning from running Furnish was to keep my mouth shut, right, as much as possible, because when you're building a fledgling startup, it's very important to figure out everything that you want to say first internally before you even go and say anything externally. So I'll give you an example. The 2 or 3 most common questions that are asked to internet companies are: when is the next round? How many people are you hiring? And off late it's been, 3 months ago it was, when are you going for an IPO? And now it is about, when are you laying off people, etc. Right? So, and as a theme, this hasn't changed much, right? Like even 6-7 years ago when I was running Furnish, the most common question I would get is, what's your valuation? What's your revenues? When are you hiring more people? Are you launching new countries, etc.? And I felt the pressure to try and be in the media and answer many of these questions, right? Now the problem is, to a lot of these questions, even I don't have the answers. Like I don't know what my valuation is going to be, and I don't know when I'm going to raise the next round, and I don't know if I'm going to hire any people next year or not. So one of the principles that I applied when starting Cast24 was that we will not talk externally about anything that we cannot talk internally about, right? So what we say internally is exactly what we will say externally. And if it means that we don't have anything to say, which is exciting for the media to cover, that's okay, right? So for first 3 years of Cast24, we were silent on communication, right? Now as a consumer startup, it's highly counterintuitive, right? But I think it was very important for me to try and only say what I could talk about internally, right? So when we even try to have any communications, at least externally, right? I remember I only spoke to bloggers initially, right? Because the auto bloggers were interested in our business idea. They were more interested in what the company does. How can you make buying or selling a car easier? They were interested in that, right? But a wide variety of people were not, and that's okay, right? That's okay, because there was no news on funding, there was no news on valuation, right? Those are usually the hooks that get people to talk about, get people to want to listen to your story and want to know more about you. And I think that worked well for us, honestly, because what we have managed to build to some extent is trust internally, right? And when I think about communication, it is not just about what I say to the external world. It is about whether my team, which is in thousands now, not just in India but across geographies, are they also saying the same things, right? Not necessarily on an external forum, but even to their friends or family or to anybody they are talking to, even to customers. And that's extremely tough, right? And I think that's, in my mind, one of the most important thing, which is to build trust in your communication, and has to happen first internally, because the last thing you want is that you say something externally, that I say something here on this forum, and my team hears it or listens it and say, what is Vikram talking about, right? This is not how we do things. This is not what Cars 24 stands for. What we say and what we do are two different things is the last thing I want to hear. So for me, so far, and of course, communications is not something that I'm an expert on, but I'm learning. But for me, the most important thing, just from first principles, has been say whatever you can say to anybody, right? And you don't have to massage or change what you say depending on the audience or the context. And if it means that you cannot talk about a lot of things, that's completely okay too, right? If it means that sometimes you don't respond, that's completely okay too, right? And in the current context, right, these layoff stories on internet companies is actually a great example of that, right? Because right now last year there was a competition on who can break the story on startup valuation first, right? And at that point, a lot of leaks were happening, a lot of speculative stories were happening, and that's okay. You don't have to respond to them, because I literally didn't have anything to say internally. Like, if there's not a round happening and somebody publishes that, Cars 24 is raising money, there's nothing to say on that, either externally or internally. And similarly, at the moment when everybody is trying to run the race on who can break the story on a startup going down, laying off people, how these companies will never make money ever in their life, how many entrepreneurs are playing Ponzi game of sort of raising the valuations, and you can't do anything about it. That's okay, right? That's okay. I think what we try to focus again in times like these is first more on internal communication, right? Because that's in my mind, the fundamental. The people who are working in my company, do they continue to believe in the vision or not, right? For internet companies, these are super tough times, right? These are perhaps toughest times in last 15, 20 years. Maybe, a lot of people joke that, most of the founders were not even born when the last recession had happened. And I guess that's right. In my career, I haven't seen a downturn, perhaps. So we'll see how this goes. But I think what's important is, honestly, it doesn't change much on how you run a business, right? Of course, you have to make adjustments. Sometimes you have to take tough decisions, etc. But the principles of how you run the business don't change. You still go out trying to delight your consumers every day, and that remains the same. Of course, you have to make a lot of adjustments. So that's sort of, again, our core focus. And I believe that when we focus on that, it sort of also reflects in external communications. So one of the examples that comes to my mind, just recently, one of my shareholders was asking me, how come there are no leaks on Cars 24, right? It's not that we are not sending memos internally on how to navigate the downturn right now, or what's going to happen. Are we going to cut costs? Are we going to do, shut certain initiatives? Are we going to, optimize? Lots of questions internally. Of course, we are answering those questions. We are sending internal communication. There was one we sent 15 days ago to pretty much everybody in the company. It hasn't leaked, right? And I have seen from several other startup founders where their communication is getting leaked left, right, and center. So I don't know what they are doing versus what I am doing, because I am not privy to how they are operating. But what I know for sure is that for us, I think when we are communicating, I think we are doing probably a 7 or a 8 on 10 job of ensuring that when our employees are reading our communication, they know that we mean it, right? They know that there is authenticity. They know that the leadership, what they are saying is what they mean. And in turbulent times like these, one of the answers, unfortunately, even as a leader, you have to give is, I don't know, right? So for example, when people ask, is this going to get worse? I don't know, right? There's no point trying to tell people this is going to get better. I don't know. This will, like, the downturn in internet will last for 10 months, 2 years, 5 years, 2 months. I have no idea, right? So the only thing we tell people is, let's prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Now, it sounds like a counterintuitive advice. As a leader, you have to always sort of stand firm and give hope. But I think in contexts like these, you can't also give pointless hope, right? You have to be first authentic and transparent, and you have to make people know that you do care for them, right? And if you show them that you care for them, I think they understand, right? They understand that even if things are uncertain, I know as a member of Cars 24 that the leadership team will stand by me, and we are all in this together. So that's sort of what we try and do on communication internally, and that means that whatever we do externally also has to mimic the same, right? And externally, it's primarily, say, media, with shareholders, and most importantly with customers, right? I think the communication that we do with media or shareholders is still way more controlled, because there are few spokesperson who are talking and doing those communications. I think what we do with customers is the toughest one, right? Because customers do have bad experiences all the time, right? There are things that we haven't fixed, right? That's a reality, right? When you are trying to solve for something as incredibly hard as helping people buy and sell pre-owned cars. Now, we want the experience for a consumer to be as smooth as possible, as easy as possible. For us to do it, it's just nuts. It's mind-boggling hard. And last night I was talking to one of my team members, and I was saying, like, what we do is insanely hard, right? And like, even after 7 years of building this, I am just stumped every day, the kind of execution challenges we are trying to overcome. And again, that sort of is something where acknowledging, even with consumers and then obviously with our employees, about things that we are not doing well on our customer experiences is again becomes very important. We have to literally call it out, right? So that people don't feel that there are elephants in the room and there are some things to be not said. Today in the afternoon, we are having a session with the leadership team on how can we improve our customer experience. And my feedback to the team was that before we start the session, let us call out what we think are the 10 things that we are screwing upon, 10 things that we are doing poorly on the customer side, so that people can then add more. They can talk openly about what are the things we don't do well. So yeah, I think those are the kind of things we do on the input side, right? Now, I'm not talking about the outcome side, which is how much coverage you get, what are the perceptions in different or kind of audiences you are talking to. But on the input side, I think we have to work daily on our communication. And my sort of internal metric on that is trust, authenticity, empathy, right? That, because, my audience is in front of me every day, which is my team members, right? And my customers. And they help me sort of fine tune and get feedback on what we can do better on in terms of how we talk about Cars 24 to anybody, right? So that's what we do in terms of strategy. And lastly, I think many things that we have said in our sort of more mass media campaigns, things like, when we started the business, we focused only on sellers. And when we focused on sellers, we were focused on helping sellers sell their car in a super easy manner. Traditionally, all of us have experienced how selling a car could be pretty annoying, right? You have to go to multiple people and try and get a price, etc., and spend a lot of time. So we were just simply saying, okay, we are making it seamless and hassle-free, right? But as we were iterating on the model, we realized that speed is the most important thing, right? And it's sort of linked to not having the hassle. But when a consumer is selling their car, we realize that speed is of the utmost importance, right? Especially getting the money into their account. Once they start the process, they want to get done with it very quickly, right? Which is very counterintuitive to what you would hear when you speak to the consumers, because they would tell you that, and still it continues till date, that I will try 5 places and I'll try and get the best price, and they are right. But when they actually get into the process, nobody enjoys that process, and the speed becomes of the utmost importance. So a lot of our communication became about speed, right? How can you sell your car in 30 minutes, right? We'll make an instant payment. And we sort of iterated upon that a lot. And one of the internal debates used to be that we are saying sell your car in 30 minutes, but it's not actually happening, right? So a lot of development on technology side, on the product side, actually shifted, focused on ensuring that we can help consumers sell their car quickly. And of course now we are focusing on both helping a consumer not just sell their car, but also buy a car. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to speak about. We have obviously done a lot of mass media campaigns. We have done a lot of shareholder reach outs. We've raised a lot of capital. We have got a bit of press, both good and bad. But instead of sort of talking about those outcomes, I thought I should actually talk about the inputs. And again, as I continue to build Cars24 for next 20 years, I think my focus continues to be just fine-tuning my communication internally to my employees and then to my customers. And because I see them on a daily basis, the feedback that I get is the best way to then fine-tune my communication to the rest of the stakeholders who are in any way related to Cars24 as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your perspective. And we really shared some really wonderful insights with all of us. And I think all of us have something to take away from that keynote. Ladies and gentlemen, we are opening the floor for a couple of questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hands and feel free to ask. Just a couple of questions. Do we have any questions? I think we have a question coming up from the second table and also from the last.
Hi, my name is Rohan Poddar, and basically I run a production company. We are in brand storytelling. The theme that you've mentioned you about corporate storytelling, and that really intrigues me. I would like to know your views on how do you relate to corporate storytelling and how do you look at it? Thanks.
Sorry, could you just, Rohan, repeat the last line?
Sure. So your theme mentions about corporate storytelling, and I was really keen to understand how you look at corporate storytelling in your context, and what's your views on that, and how do you think it can be done? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. No, so look, as I said, I try to de-jargon it in my mind and just think about it from first principles, which is, what do I do when I go to work, right? And when I go to work, I think the most important thing is that if I open my mouth, I should say something that I can say to anybody, right? That, to me, that's the most important thing. And if there is something that I can't talk about, then I don't talk about it to anybody, right? So for example, I really don't know when we will IPO, right? So trying to be speculative about it is not something that I engage in either internally or externally. But on the things that I can talk about internally, right, then it means that I can talk about those things externally as well, right? So for example, if we are going to launch a new product line, right, that's something we first talk about internally, get that feedback, see how our own team members are responding to it, and once we have their feedback, once we know how they are thinking about it, I think it's a good practice, it's a good preparation, it's good feedback loop, which then allows you to go and talk about it to anybody else, right? It could be media, it could be your shareholders, it could be in a mass media campaign, etc. So I think the focus is on input, and the focus is primarily on testing everything. It's not even testing. It's like your communication internal should be trustworthy, should be transparent, should be empathetic, and be open about that there are things that you can't talk about, and that's okay, right? And let people ask those questions, right? Don't stop people from asking those questions. Like, for example, we had a town hall yesterday, and the first thing people ask is, will there be more layoffs? Like, we've expected more appraisal than what has happened. Why aren't we launching 5 more countries? And those questions come 5 times, right? For like next 6 months, I know those questions will keep getting repeated, but that's okay. You have to take the questions as they come, even if you have to answer 5 times, right? So you cannot ever over communicate, right? It's never enough. So you have to just keep doing. That's, I would say, 1/3 of my job is to just keep talking to my employees, customers, and external shareholders. Does that answer? Thank you.
We have a scope for just one more question. If we have it, we'll take it. We have it coming from the second table here in the front. Maybe bring it to the center table. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ridhima. First of all, thanks a lot for sharing what you had. It's more of a curiosity question. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you mentioned that initially it was a bit difficult for you to communicate. I think you meant officially. Then what was the strategy? Because I'm sure there must have been some message in the first 3 years which you had to, probably communicate maybe to your team or to the stakeholders that you were reaching out. Then what was the alternate that you took?
Yeah. Thank you. So in the first 3 years, we had zero communication with the media, right? And that was because those were formative years where we were still there was far more uncertainty and volatility in building the business out in the first few years, right? I mean, today it's still more predictable, right? You have business plans and AOPs, and you know what's going to come tomorrow. And you can make changes, but first 2-3 years were just business model iteration. So it was a conscious call at that point to not talk externally, because the consumers that we wanted were not in millions. We were talking about consumers in thousands, right? And we could get those consumers organically. So it's not that we had to put any extra effort on it. So there was a question mark on why should you sort of do any external communication of any kind, right? PR, television, radio, etc. So that was one reason. And the second reason, so we, there was, from an objective perspective, there was not a image that we were trying to build. We were not trying to acquire customers inorganically, etc. And secondly, there was a lot of business model fine tuning that was going on, right? The last thing we wanted back then was criticism. Right? Because there's a team that's sort of building it out and doing a lot of experimentation, and you don't want some articles who are saying that this is not going to work, right? And again, not against criticism, right? I think criticism is super important, but I think all the relevant criticism was available internally from our own team members and from employees and from customers, right? So we just didn't want any distractions, right? Because it was hard to explain at that point what we are really doing, right? A lot of people confused us with classifieds, right? And even till date, right? That, okay, I can sell my car on OLX. So what is Cars24? How is it different? Why will it work? No auto company has become big anywhere in the world. Why will you become big? There's a lot of fraud that happens in this business, right? So we didn't want that to be distracting, right? So it was a combination of, there was no objective from our perspective to reach out, and secondly, from attracting talent perspective, again, we were so small that it didn't matter. So we couldn't think of any objectives to have a proactive external communication, But internal was always on, right? And looking back, I think that gave us some practice, right? Because there was so much of change in the communication, like the example I gave, right? From saying that, Cars24 is a hassle-free way to sell your car to sell your car in 30 minutes, right? That was an iteration that happened over those first few years, right? It was good that that iteration was happening internally, and we were sure about that value proposition before we started talking about it in public, right? The last thing you want is you go and start talking about one thing, and then suddenly you have changed your stance and you start talking about something else. So yeah, it's a combination of both. We were iterating on our business, and I guess as a second-time founder, I was very clear that I was not enamored by going out and trying to sort of speak to the media, right? Because I had done some of that at Fab Furnish, and I was like, okay, I mean, I've done that to know that you don't need to be out there all the time, right? It's not a competition in how much you are out versus another founder is out, etc. So it was this was primarily the reason. We were iterating on a business, and we didn't see any real needs, any objectives that we needed to accomplish back then. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.